Welcome to Health Hacktivators with lifestyle medicine doctor, GP and longevity expert Dr. Alka Patel. This show will help you to discover a hidden health hacking code that unlocks your phenomenal potential for an outstanding health span, lifespan and wealth span. The show features candid conversations with celebrities, influencers and industry icons, real-life stories and cutting-edge health activating advice that other doctors might not tell you. Discover why now is the time to join the strategic self-care revolution and experience the profound effects this will have on your personal and professional success. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alka Patel.
Before we get into today's show, please do support today's show partner, Youth and Earth. Youth and Earth have a range of products that I love to use myself to supercharge my metabolism, to support my health, and to slow down cellular aging. Just be sure you click the link in the show notes for exclusive offers, which Youth and Earth are so generously giving for listeners of this show. Hi, hey, and hello, Health Activators. On today's show, I am asking one question, I'm reviewing 2 references, and I'm giving you 3 hacks so that activating your health is as easy as 1, 2, 3. So today's one question is, how can I prevent weight gain through the menopause? Now, if you remember from last week's show, I was talking to Sue Moxley. Sue Moxley is the beauty editor of Menopause Life. And on that episode, she shared how her weight gain during the menopause then led to her yo-yo dieting. And then she went on to develop dysfunctional eating patterns during her transition through the menopause. So if you haven't already, please do go over and go back and listen to her story, because it's something she's never talked about before. And I'm so glad that she was able to do that here with me, because it is something we do need to talk so much more about. So what do I want to do in today's episode? Well, in today's episode, I want to underpin the menopausal weight changes that so many women are experiencing with some science behind those hormones that are involved in weight pathways. So what I'll be doing is telling you about 7 key hormones that are involved in weight pathways. And I'll give you then my top 3 hacks to then support your weight management actions around the menopause. But before I do that, here is the most important thing that I want you to know. Know that weight gain through the menopause does not need to be your default. Because although, yes, hormonal changes are all primed to point you in that direction, you can circumvent this. And I'll be telling you how. But before I do that, let's first kick off with some terminology. Menopause, perimenopause, and postmenopause. Now, you'll often hear the menopause used as an umbrella term for what is really 3 different time periods. So to break it down, the menopause itself is a retrospective distinctive time that you can actually only identify 12 months after your last period. So this is how it goes. If you have a period and then you don't have another one, and 12 months has passed, then the month of your last period is the date of your menopause. Does that make sense? It comes from the Greek meaning men meaning month and pause meaning stop. So menopause is the month that your periods stopped. And then the time after this is the postmenopausal time. And the time before this is the perimenopausal time. So post meaning after and peri meaning around. And it's this perimenopausal time. Well, that's the time of fluctuating and declining hormones. And it can occur a few months to a few years to 10 years before the menopause itself. And all of this is a real time of physiological change. So my preference really is to refer to this umbrella term of the menopause more as the time of the menopausal transition, because that is what's happening. It's a transition through changing hormones and changing biochemistry and changing physiology that all plays out like a symphony in a way, with so many interconnected hormones, and that lead conductor of this orchestra being estrogen. So what is going on with weight during this menopausal transition, which is a transition that for some women starts in their early 40s, but more commonly mid to late 40s. And then with the menopause itself, that month typically occurring late 40s to early 50s. Well, there was research which was published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, and that's shown that during this menopause transition, two things happen. Muscle mass decreases and fat gain increases. Sound familiar? Well, at the start of the menopause transition, that rate of fat gain has been found to double, and then muscle mass is also declining. And what we also know is that these gains and these losses, they continue until 2 years after that FMP, after that final menstrual period. And after that, 2 years after that, those trajectories of fat and muscle mass, they decelerate. So the slope is much more sort of zero slope. So the upshot is that you gain fat and you drop muscle. And then another study, well, this was published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and this looked more specifically at the numbers involved. And what it showed was a 0.23 kilogram decrease in muscle mass and a 3.4 kilogram increase in fat mass. And where's most of this fat gain occurring? Well, it's occurring at the waist, with an average 5.7 centimetre increase in waist circumference, and then an increase in your waist-hip ratio, which is the ratio of the circumference of your waist to the circumference of your hips, your waist-hip ratio. So think of the menopause transition as a change from pear to apple. But, as I said earlier, although these changes in your hormones and metabolism, they do increase this propensity towards weight gain in your 40s and your 50s, it is not an absolute. You can circumvent this. And once you know which hormones are involved, you can then target your interventions. So let me then go through the various hormones that are involved in weight and in metabolism, and let's look at how they are all very interconnected. So there's 7 hormones that I want to draw your attention to. There are others, but I want to zone in on these 7. So firstly, estrogen, and more specifically estradiol, which is your primary form of estrogen. So it's got 3 main effects that are important to know. What are these? Well, firstly, estrogen primes your body to respond to glucose, to respond to sugar, and it does this by increasing insulin, and I'll be telling you more about insulin shortly. Secondly, estradiol, in what it does is it reduces your feelings of hunger. And thirdly, it affects the type of fat that you store, and not only the type, but also where you store it. So when I said earlier, your waist-hip ratio increases through the menopausal transition, the reason this happens is related to estrogen, because estrogen affects both the type of fat you store and where you store it. So in the menopause transition, more fat is deposited around the abdomen. Now you might be wondering, well, why is this? Well, what's the reason? Unfortunately, the biology of adipose tissue, fat tissue, is hugely complex. And the truth is, there isn't really a single reason for this, but there's many multifactorial reasons. So one of these, for example, is that estrogen, well, it's not only produced by your ovaries, but it's also produced by your fat cells. So if you think about it, through that menopausal transition, the estrogen from your ovaries starts to decrease. And as it does that, what your body then does is upregulate the amount of estrogen being produced from your fat cells. And of course, it stands to reason the more fat cells you have, then the more estrogen you can produce. In addition, estrogen, what it does is it activates brown fat. So brown fat is metabolically and more thermogenically active than white fat. So white fat is the fat that we find underneath our tissues. And with brown fat, we find pockets of it in the neck and in the shoulders. So what happens is that as estrogen levels decline, then through the menopause transition, the amount of brown fat also declines, so that you have relatively more white adipose tissue, which is less metabolically active, which is more efficient at energy storage rather than energy utilization. So this is also contributing to weight gain. So what's the upshot? Well, the upshot is more white adipose tissue subcutaneously under your skin and also viscerally. So that means around your organs as well. Next hormone. The next key hormone I've already mentioned, it's insulin. So what does insulin do? Well, it's mopping up glucose by moving glucose into your muscles so that it can be used. And so as glucose levels rise, insulin levels rise. And if glucose levels stay high, then eventually with too much insulin floating around, you end up with what we call insulin resistance, which means that your muscle cells just don't want to respond anymore to insulin. So they stop letting sugar into the cells, so it stays high in your bloodstream and it gets deposited as, you guessed it, fat. So then what's going on through the menopause transition? Well, as estrogen levels drop, insulin resistance increases. And there's a few reasons as well for this. So many things are multifactorial. And one of these is related to muscle mass. So as I mentioned, muscle mass decreases through the menopause. And really from the age of about 30, your muscle mass is decreasing by an average of between 3 and 8% every decade. And this is accelerated through the menopause transition. So what happens? Well, as muscle mass reduces, this then has a very profound effect on insulin sensitivity. And why is this? It's because the destination for glucose is muscle tissue. So the less muscle tissue there is, the less glucose is removed from the blood in response to insulin, which then results in that cycle of increased insulin resistance and fat deposition. So what does this mean? Well, it means that what you ate in your 30s will have a very, very different effect of you in your 40s and in your 50s, even if what you eat is exactly the same. Next hormone. Next up is testosterone. This is involved in muscle mass as well. So testosterone is what helps you to build muscle and to reduce insulin resistance. And men and women have testosterone. And what happens through the menopause transition is that testosterone levels drop significantly, which means, again, muscle growth decreases. And, as you now know, with that, insulin resistance increases. So I also want to now talk about cortisol. So cortisol is another hormone which impacts on insulin resistance and on blood sugar. And cortisol levels, they've been known to rise through the menopause, again, for many reasons. And one of these is due to, yes, another hormone called progesterone. So progesterone is another sex hormone, and one of its functions, which you might not be aware of, one of its functions is to aid sleep. So as your progesterone levels drop through the menopause transition, sleep is more disturbed, and many women do report experiencing disturbed sleep. Progesterone affects sleep, and sleep affects cortisol. So poor sleep then means that your cortisol levels rise, and then cortisol, which is an activation hormone, in turn causes an increase in your blood sugar. So you can see already how all of these hormones are so interrelated, with one affecting another. And from what I've described, there also seems to be an emerging theme here. And that theme is around sugar and around glucose metabolism through the menopause transition. So two final hormones to tell you about, and they are your hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin growls if you're hungry. So I like to remember it by associating it with that gurgling growl, the one you hear from your stomach when you're hungry. So it's G for ghrelin, G for growl. Think hunger. And in contrast, there's leptin, which leaps into action to tell you that you're full so that you stop eating. So how does declining estrogen through the menopause transition then affect this? Well, here's how. Low estrogen impairs the function of leptin. And then the more leptin you keep releasing, just like what happens with insulin and insulin resistance, the more leptin you keep releasing, the more you develop leptin resistance, which then means that your signals that tell you that you're full, well, they just no longer leap out at you. So what happens is you find yourself continuing to eat. And many women do eat more through the menopause transition because those hunger and those satiety signals, they're no longer well regulated. So those are your 7 key hormones. And can you see how all these changes in sex hormones and metabolic hormones and hunger hormones, they all really dance together so that a decreasing level of one then impacts on a rising level of another. And all of this then results in fat gain and muscle loss, which most women notice, many women notice as gaining weight, particularly around the abdomen. So what do you do to circumvent this? How do you navigate through this? So let me give you 3 hacks, and these are, as always, based on the Health Hacktivation Code, using data and devices to make decisions. So decisions, or the key decision, which I've already said right at the beginning of this episode, is to decide that you will not let weight gain become your default through the menopause transition. Decide that despite this interplay of these key 7 hormones, weight gain does not have to be your automatic default. So where does data come into this? Well, there is a lot of information that you can access to circumvent weight gain. But what I believe also is that, that the menopause transition is a time of opportunity. It's an opportunity to zone in on your hormonal health and on your metabolic markers. So here's my suggestion. My suggestion is to get a full hormonal health check and get a metabolic markers MOT, so that then you've got data from test results that will give you a much more broader overview of where exactly to target your actions. So which tests are important? Well, I've got a blog to accompany this episode where I've gone into a lot more detail of the specific tests. So do have a read of that. But let me go through a few here now. So check your estrogen. Of course, that's important, but not just your estrogen, also the pathways by which those 3 different types of estrogen I mentioned are metabolized. So that's estradiol, estrone, and estriol. And alongside that, what's also useful is a full panel of hormones, of your sex hormones particularly, which are progesterone, prolactin, FSH, LH, testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, DHEA, and your free androgen index. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of what all of those are on this episode today. I will go into them, I'm sure, in future episodes, and I have outlined them in my blog as well. But I do just want to give you a list of the sorts of tests that are important, and the sorts of tests that I do when I support women with weight management through the menopause transition as well, because it needs to really be a no guesswork approach. Data is about using your test results to highlight the important focus areas. Now, other things then to test or consider testing are your thyroid hormones, which I haven't discussed in my top 7 today, but really important to think about, and I will go back on this in future episodes. But many symptoms of an underactive thyroid also do cross over with symptoms of the menopause and the menopausal transition, such as weight gain and tiredness. So always important to check your thyroid function as well. And the other key thing is to check what's called your HbA1c, which is a measure of your glucose control, and also your cortisol. So check your cortisol and your HbA1c, zoning in on sugar control. And so then thinking about devices, what devices can help you through this transition? Well, as you've already heard, one clear theme that's emerging from what I've described with these hormone changes and their interplay is around sugar metabolism. And the menopause transition really does have a profound effect on sugar metabolism. So one of the most helpful devices that I have found for women who are transitioning is a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. Now I'm wearing one myself, so if you're watching this, you might just be able to see it through my sleeve. It's a monitor that I wear. It's something that I give to many of my clients as well. So what does this CGM do, this continuous glucose monitor? Well, what it does is it gives you real-time data on your sugar levels. You simply get your phone and you tap the sensor and you can get real-time data on your sugar level in your blood at that moment in time, whilst in the background it's continuously monitoring, so you can see the fluxes and the spikes and the reductions in your sugar levels as well. So you can tap it any time that you want to monitor your pre-meal or your post-meal sugar levels. And it's very helpful to see how food affects you, or how stress affects you, or how sleep affects you, how all of this can affect your sugar levels, your glucose levels, and then use these numbers to nudge you to change what you do, perhaps what you eat, when you eat, how you sleep, how you manage stress, with all of this being very personalized to you. So you may find that you're craving sugar through your menopausal transition. You may find that you're more sensitive to carbohydrates. You may find with your continuous glucose monitor on that you're getting nighttime lows of sugar. And that may be why you're waking up feeling brain fog and not having enough clarity. So really there is no one size fits all when it comes to weight management through the menopause transition. But what I know is that real-time knowledge is what's important. Real-time knowledge that is bespoke to you. Got to be individualized. Your numbers, your data belong to you. Now, it's really important as well to make sure that if you're going to use a continuous glucose monitor, that you do have some advice around using it. I always talk to my clients directly and individually before recommending a continuous glucose monitor like the one that I'm wearing, because what I don't want is to change all of this into an obsessive or disordered eating phenomenon. You heard last week how Sue did develop disordered eating through her yo-yo dieting in response to her weight gain. So you want to be absolutely sure that this is the right device for you. So always talk to your doctor before you go through this pathway, or as I've always said on the show, you're always very welcome to talk to me as well. So decisions, data, devices. Make a decision to not let weight gain through the menopause transition be your default. Have a metabolic MOT and a hormonal health check. Get a full panel of blood tests and use a CGM to get crystal clear about your own glucose patterns. So if you are finding, well, what do you do? Well, if you are finding your sugar levels are very high or they're fluctuating significantly and rapidly, here's 3 things that you can do. Number 1 is to increase fiber. So fiber is a slow release complex carbohydrate. So things like flax seeds or Brussels sprouts or oranges and apples, oats. Increase fiber in your food choices. Second thing to do is to increase exercise. So what studies have shown is that a 10-minute walk after eating helps to reduce your sugar spikes. Now, of course, sugar rises after a meal. It's meant to. We need glucose, we need sugar. But what we want to avoid is rapid spikes and then rapid declines. So here's what I say. Ditch the dishes. They can wait. Head out for that walk instead straight after eating. And the third thing is to increase herbs. So something like cinnamon, for example, we know increases your insulin sensitivity. And also turmeric, ginger, garlic. So add these to your dishes. So there you go. How to prevent weight gain through your menopausal transition. And if you want to explore any of this, any of what I've shared in more depth, then, as I said, please do get in touch. There's so much more, of course, to talk about in relation to the menopause. And I've no doubt that I will be exploring this in a lot more detail in future episodes. But I'm always very keen in each episode to have a very specific topic area. So this month, this week, today has been all about the menopause transition and weight gain. And no doubt it's a subject that I will be coming back to as well. So let me know, drop me a message, leave me a comment. What's the one thing that you're going to do today to prevent weight gain through your menopausal transition?